For the past 3 days, I've been working on a system that I thought was going to be really easy, and then it turned out to be really hard, and then it turned out to be a little bit easier than I was afraid it was going to be. And it's very monkey-like, so it's super fitting for this game. I'm really happy with how it's turned out. And that is being able to swing on horizontal branches, or red cylinders in this case. The camera still is a little janky with it, but I literally just finished it, so there's still a bit of polish, but I'm super proud of how it is already. It also works. Oh, see, there's more camera being weird. I don't even know what it's hitting. Probably that cylinder, I bet. Yeah, okay, so that's not too big a problem. But what I was trying to say is it works backwards too, which is super cool. And also the amount that you launch is based off of your angular speed that you're spinning at. And you get a small boost to that speed if you jump at it with speed already.
Yep.
That's what happens when I jumped from this one to the other one and it was spinning really fast. That was because I had a lot of speed from launching off of this before.
Yep.
I think I made that one a little too far out. I know I've grabbed it like once or twice, so it's definitely possible. I also made it so you cannot dive into it. It'll just be solid. Because I was having major issues if it was diving into it. I also made it so you can't wall jump off of it or wall run up off of it, because that was also something that was happening. You can also control the speed, and if I stop hitting the joystick, he will just sort of naturally fall back down all smooth like. That feels so good. It feels so good to see that actually happen. What I originally had is the player could choose the angle specifically. Like if they released right here, it would send them like straight up instead of at an angle. But that proved to be a little too challenging for both me and for players. So right now it's set to just a 45-degree angle, which keeps it predictable. The momentum part gives it a little bit of unpredictability. So it's good to keep it predictable where I can. So for now, I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to talk about the systems of it a little bit because it's fresh on my mind. So this is the actual component here for the swing branch. This is just the collider for it. And it's just, this isn't actually used at all anymore. I'm pretty sure if I delete this physics constraint, everything will be just fine. If not, I'm gonna cry because I just deleted it. But I'm pretty certain that I'm not even using that in the slightest anymore. Yeah, I had to switch that out for a physics constraint actor because the constraint component could not do what I wanted. So it's quite literally just a collider, and that's all this is. And it also has the swing branch tag on it. And on the actual player character is where I have branch detection, and I have a branch detector here. And basically, if the overlap component has that swing branch tag, and if it's allowed to swing, it'll set this variable to the other component. And then I have to spawn the physics constraint actor. And I had to use an actor because the component was not detaching properly when people were jumping off of the branch. So when you grabbed on another branch, it would still be trying to pull you towards the first branch you jumped on. And it just made it impossible to rotate at any high speed at all. And this was the solution. So I store a reference to that. And I also store a reference to the speed you grabbed it at, because I will have to use that later. And I didn't account for Z because it already kind of does that, and I didn't want to mess with that. Because right now if you fall on the branch, it'll make you swing around pretty fast compared to if you jumped up at it. Hopefully it won't cause problems. We shall see. And then I make the character movement not orient to movement, and I halt it and set its movement mode to none because I want to use my own custom one. I probably could have just set that to be custom instead of none. I think that's what I meant to do. If I switch that, I don't think it'll actually change anything. Yeah, but I say that doesn't change anything at all. Oh, that's so satisfying. Besides the camera being pretty awful during it. But I think that's just because the cylinders are still hard. Or, I mean, they collide with the camera, I mean. Okay, anyways, after I do that, this position cylinder was a solution I came up with where basically what I was wanting to do, because at this point, no matter where you jumped along the branch, it would always snap you right to the middle. And I wanted to make it so that if I jumped on the edge here, he would grab the edge. And it was much, much, much easier to simply make it so that instead of teleporting the character, I just took the actual cylinder collider and I would move it to where I needed to be, or I would rotate it if the player grabbed it backwards. And the reason this works, the rotation specifically as well, is because I use the cylinders forward when I use the launch direction, so that way the branches can be rotated in the world and the player can like jump off normally. And that accounts for that like perfectly. It was actually a really, really useful thing for me to think of. So I just set the rotation or the location of the cylinder. I can just make this visible to show it probably, but I get the actor's inverse transform location of their X, so that way I can get where on X they are relative to the actor's space. And then I add that to the X, and I just get the relative location for the cylinder for the other one. So I'm only changing the X, and that's where I set the cylinder. And then in order to detect if the cylinder needs to be rotated, I just get the dot product of what is the forward for the branch, which is the right vector, because this is aligning straight with X on accident. So I kind of had to work around that as I went. But using the dot product, you can tell if it is if these vectors are facing the same direction or not. So this works well. This is basically the default rotation. I just added or took away 180 on the X. And then from that, or afterwards, I set the actor's rotation to the cylinder's right vector, which is actually the forward, and I make the actor face forward. And I set the actor's location to the cylinder's location, which I just updated over here. Same with the rotation, I just updated those. But I subtract 110 because that's perfect for his hang distance. And here is I just set the collision response to overlap world static, just in case I come into a situation where the mesh it's on gets in the way. If I were to turn that off, it would work fine still, but just in case, I'm leaving this on here, and I will reevaluate this when the time comes. Then I set the angular damping to, I think 3. All this really does is when I let go of the controller, how he kind of rocks back and forth until he settles, that just adjusts that. And then I simulate physics. And until I have set simulate physics true, the constraints will not work at all, which is where I'm getting to, is setting up the physics constraints. But right before I do that, I just set the physics linear velocity to 0. And actually set up the constraint, the one that I spawned earlier, all I'm doing is setting its constrained components to be the cylinder and the capsule of the player. And then these are all just the variables. So I locked the twist and the swing, and I left the swing one free. And I locked all the linear ones. So all this means is he can only spin on that one axis. And then I set disable collision so that there would be 0 chances of it colliding with each other, even though their collision is set up not to collide. That's a precaution. And then I would activate the swing branch controls in the player controller, and this is where the player actually controls the swing branch. And then I set the swing detection disabled to true, because you do not want to detect the branch detector to detect another branch or the same branch while you're already swinging. That's not good. And this down here just does the opposite of up here and just detaches everything and resets everything that needs to be reset. So this is that same custom event that activates the swing mode. This jump off branch delay, all this does is make it so you can't immediately jump off of it, because when I was doing that in playtesting, it would launch the player really, really far. And this was a quick way to fix that. Anyways, I get a reference to the branch actor itself because I ended up needing it later. And using the branch component that I passed through, I made a new variable just for my own convenience. And then this basically just is a variable for my player controller saying, hey, I'm swinging on a branch right now, so don't do other things like attack while I'm doing this. And I made it so if when you grabbed on you were spinning, it would stop you from spinning and stop any spin attacks that may have been happening. And also, as precautionary, I set flip kicking to 0 or to off, because it's possible to grab onto the branches while flip kicking. And then this is the impulse that adds momentum based on your speed. All it's doing is getting the root joint of the player's mesh and getting its rotation. And the up vector, which is actually the forward, is where I'm applying that force, and all I'm doing is multiplying the swing start speed by an amount that made sense. I have not clamped this yet. I probably will very soon. I haven't polished any of this, like value-wise, to make it feel as good as possible. So I will have to clamp this float value still. I'm going to write that in my notes after this, actually. But that's when I do that. And to actually control it, basically on my joystick input event that I have set up, this gets called based on the conditions. So if you're swinging on a branch and you're hitting the joystick, this event gets called. Right. And I wanted it to not immediately go at max speed, so I made it accelerate to max speed by making a acceleration multiplier that maxes out at 1, and when you let go it gets set to 0. So it starts at 0 and it builds up to 1 with how much control you have on the swing, just because that feels more natural to build the momentum up a little. This basically just says if I can jump and I'm pressing jump off, and I will go to that later. This, I'm not going to go into this because it's honestly still a little tough to like explain everything that happens here. But basically, all this does is I'm getting the input I need to match the forwards or backwards of the swing branch. And then I determine if the player is inputting in that direction and putting that out to a Boolean. So if your input is pressing the forward of the swing branch, this is set to 1 and you add force. And if it's backwards, this is set to -1 and you add force. These, I have two variables like these that have negatives that multiply with each other. And that was just my way of getting the launch angle to be the correct 45-degree angle based on when you release. And what I mean by that is compile. What am I even compiling? Okay, whatever. What I mean by that is if I were to get up there, if I were to let go facing forward, going forward out like this, it would come out at that angle. And if I were to face forward, rock back like this, it'd come out at that angle. And also vice versa for when you grab on backwards, or when you're moving backwards like this and you go over to make sure it throws you over. That's just my way to set that up. Let's see what we got. The actual force that it's adding for the launch angle isn't crazy complex, really. I'm getting the root joint again, and at the location of the root joint, which is by where his feet are, I want to get its up vector, which is actually the forward, because my player base is also rotated weirdly where it's facing the wrong way. I take that and I get the current influence for branch swing that I have set, and I multiply it with my acceleration. And sheesh, I could probably put this here now that I think about that, since I added this well after this. But basically if it's forward, multiply it. It's backwards, multiply it by -1 as well. So yeah, there's the actual controls for the rotation on the swing branch. And jumping off, I have to get the physics angular velocity of the capsule component because it's spinning. But I want to get that in the relative transform of the actor itself, so it doesn't matter which way the actor's facing, it will still get the same value. And he's spinning on his y-axis, and this will come out inverted, so I re-inverted it so that way if you're jumping out forwards, it'll be positive. Jumping out backwards, this will be negative. And this will basically just be this value that I use to calculate later. And this is not used, actually. I don't think I use this at all. So I can delete this variable completely. And compile before I delete that. Goodbye, wasted memory. Okay. And then that's when I exit the branch swing on here, which just it does the opposite of up here. It breaks all the physics constraint connections, and it resets orient to movement, all that stuff. And then after it's disconnected, that's when I'll actually start the launching. Otherwise the launch wouldn't work because he'd still be constrained. Oh, and also worth noting, I had to set this before he launched because this turns off simulate physics, which makes this nothing. So this has to be before this, which is also why I had to store it in a variable. Anyways, I think I have a variable for that now, actually. I have branch actor up here. So it looks like I can just do this. Yep. So inverse transform location. So basically this is just if this is above 0, launch forward. Right. It's basically the same thing, but the way I'm doing it is I'm taking the root, and if the root is in front of the branch, launch forward. If it's behind the branch, launch backward. And then similar as before here, if it's backwards, reverse. If it's forwards, don't. And add impulse. So how I got my 45-degree angle is I just got the forward of the branch component with the up of the branch actor, and I just lerped it. I'm probably going to change some of this later. I might make it have a little more wiggle room than just be 45 degrees every single time. I'm not too sure yet. And then this is where that multiplier from down here, wait, no, that's this one up here, actually. That's where this multiplier goes. And this one is used to flip the direction of which way is forward, based on if you're jumping behind the branches forward or in front of it. And this one is used to, say you have your 45-degree angle. This says if you need to shoot this way or if you need to shoot this way. Right, hopefully you can see my mouse in OBS. It says which way on that vector to shoot, because there's two directions, it goes both ways. This picks which one, and that's right here. So I take that launch angle and I just multiply it by the launch angular value times a certain amount that felt right, multiplied by the direction it needs to go. And I add the impulse, and I set the actor's rotation to be for the... I could actually probably fix this, because right now it's just using the component branches forward. It should be using this, right? I'm pretty sure I should be using this. Right now they can just like instantly turn in the air, so I didn't even notice, but I think this will actually be an improvement. Well, I'll test that out here in a second. And I set everything back to null before finally the very last thing saying, hey, I'm no longer on the branch. Okay, let's test those two changes I made. I think it's fine in that they are improvements, and it should function the exact same for the most part. Okay, let's try going back this way. Backwards. I want to watch that in slow-mo. That shadow on the ground is something I've noticed too. I might have to up the tick rate on that to make this look less strange. It's definitely a little bizarre seeing the shadow do that. Oh, okay. That wasn't exactly spot on. Probably because at this point, after I launch, this isn't forward, I don't think. So I might have to get the actual forward of the branch this time and multiply it by that for it to work properly. And then I either have to invert that and leave it as it was, or this will fix that issue.
Huh?
No, he's still facing that way. Oh, it's because the actor itself might be facing that way. Yeah, X is that way. So what I will need to do actually is the right vector of... Wait, this is the branch component. I want the branch actor. That would also... component. No. Nah, just get the actor right vector. That's all I want. And I think this will work. But yeah, that's pretty much the whole system that I built here for this. It took, I don't know, probably like 18 or so hours. That didn't look right.
Yep. Woo!
Sometimes it's hard to grab them. I want to try going backwards, actually. I will look into that on my own. I'm not going to record that. But yeah, that pretty much does it for my swing system. Pretty cool. I'm proud of it.